Thanks for listening to Star Lores. If you like the show, please consider subscribing and giving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also help us make more great content by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com. We would also love to hear from you on social media. You can follow Star Lores on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Enjoy the show, and may the Force be with you.
You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. We're getting real intimate today. It's just me and Christian here. Did you get the cream for that Bothan nether rot, Christian? Is that cleared up yet?
I've been given an ointment by my medical droid doctor.
Was it a Bactaid patch?
Yes, but I'm not telling you where it has to go.
Your upper extremities, as they said on Wikipedia. Or no, the upper thighs. Wink, 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 wink. Okay, so today we're going to be sort of reviewing or giving at least a retrospective of the Tales of the Jedi comic book series that came out in the mid to late 90s. I think it ran.
I think it was like 95 to
98 or 99.
Yeah,
which is really interesting. Like, because in my kid brain, like in 96 or whatever, I knew about the stories that were in Tales of the Jedi. But then it's like, that seems like light years, pardon the pun, away from the Phantom Menace, right?
Yeah.
But really, the Tales of the Jedi pretty much ran up until Phantom Menace was released.
Yeah, I get that same weird perception too. Like you were saying, there's a lot of lore that you feel like it's super old, but then if you think how it ran right into episode 1 and...
But then, of course, that's a perfect segue because Tales of the Jedi is super old in Star Wars
thousands of
chronology,
years old.
Right? It's 4,000. Well, technically, it starts before
5,000.
7,000
years before.
If you want to get real technical, because that's when the Dark Jedi exiles landed on Korriban. But that part of the story is kind of brushed over. It's actually a little bit confusing as well because there are some panels depicting the Dark Jedi exiles being exiled, presumably being sort of herded onto ships, but it looks like it's Sith species being herded onto Sith ships, which is confusing because like in the flashback they're supposed to be talking about the Dark Jedi exiles and the Sith species hadn't left Korriban yet.
So, okay,
it's very confusing. Oh no, they had left Korriban.
Yeah, because
they hadn't left the Stygian Caldera.
In what was the series we did before this that takes place chronologically before this? We already did the review. Dawn of the Jedi.
Right.
There are Sith that appear in Dawn of the Jedi.
But they were just kidnapped. They were essentially alien abducted and probed by
by the
Celestials or whoever built the Thoyors.
Yeah. Okay.
The Goa'uld from Star Trek, I think. or not Star Trek. Stargate. The guys who fly around in pyramids.
Yeah. That is also a point just about the whole series as a general statement is that there's a lot of time skipping in it. It covers a huge period of time. It covers
about like 800 to 1,000 years sort of
worth of stuff, right? So they do a lot of time skips within it. So if you're not keeping track, suddenly you jump like 600 years in the future at some point, and so it can get a little bit confusing.
And then they go back and forth. And actually, I realized that as I was reading the Tales of the Jedi on the Dark Horse digital app, I think they're organized in chronological order,
not release order
for Star Wars, not release order. So
yeah.
You actually get a weird different picture of the
Yeah.
stories.
So they even kind of like how the movies came out, the comic book series, they would do a segment of the story and then they would do a prequel as a sub segment, and then they'd go back and forth. And so even as they were like,
I think the first story arc is it Ulic Qel-Droma and the Beast Wars of Onderon.
I honestly don't even know what the actual release order was.
I think that was the first release, but then chronologically, the first thing is the Great Hyperspace War with Jory and Gav, Daragon.
Which they released in real time later. Right?
Yeah, that was a prequel. That was like, ironically, what George Lucas did. This is another interesting thing, is that both George Lucas and now Disney sort of make the claim that they're not taking from the comics at all, but yet pretty much everything they do in the movies
inspired by
looks like it was taken directly from the comics.
Yeah. At least in George Lucas's case, and you'll see a lot of this is, and I didn't even know
that's not a very good example though. Just doing a prequel, especially because this prequel is thousands of years or hundreds of years, whereas the Phantom Menace is only a few decades before, right?
Yeah,
it's the same epoch of time.
Yeah, but I was just gonna say, a lot of the ideas they do, it's cool how it ties the expanded universe into the regular movies or the mainstream stuff. There's little elements that they did lift and incorporate into the movies later on. Which we'll get into more detail later. There's some cool examples of that. But I like that how it ties the EU with the mainstream stuff.
So I brought up Ulic Qel-Droma and the Beast Wars. So let's go through our dramatis personae a little bit here. Look at this lantern-jawed fellow. That's something about the art in Tales of the Jedi is all the male protagonists just have the strongest chins I've ever seen.
All a bunch of Easter Island heads.
You would break your fist trying to box that man. I mean, look at that thing. You could like scale it with you'd have, or get a helo dropped on top of his jaw and snowboard down. So Ulic is from Alderaan, which is of course one of the more important planets in the Star Wars universe. You find out that like basically everybody who's important,
everybody who's anybody comes from
Alderaan until it gets destroyed, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a way to try and add weight to it retrospectively. Is like all these great heroes came from there.
Yeah,
and now that it is destroyed, you kind of lose that history and legacy. And
especially because Alderaan was so well known for being a peaceful planet, and then it being destroyed is like this is the true face of the Empire's reign, is the most peaceful planet the galaxy's ever known gets blown to smithereens, right? Although they weren't that peaceful considering how many terrorists they churned out.
All a matter of perspective.
So I'm not really sure why they got that reputation. But be that as it may, he also trained under Arca-Jeth, who's this old wizened. Is Arca-Jeth blind? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but he definitely gives those.
Or he just has like opaque eyes for some reason.
The art style makes it so difficult and open to interpretation sometimes.
It's a strange mix of like sort of manga influenced, but also like superhero comics at the same time. And it's like,
it's very unique for a Star Wars run for sure.
Yeah. And they swapped artists a bunch of times, and then like, they had to bring on hired guns like mid-production because they were so aggressive and wanted to
hit their deadlines,
churn out so much stuff. But it's like the one artist they got just was only a human, so they couldn't do it.
Yeah. And it just creates an inconsistent art style. Some of the characters I remember looking very different between issues, which adds a little bit to the confusion too. But like,
and then as we were saying, when it's archived not in release order, it also gets more confusing because it's like, usually in comics, and even if you watch like Family Guy or cartoons and stuff, you see the development of a style, and then they finally hit that really polished style that they're going for.
Yeah,
and that's what they get. And so when you divorce the release chronologically, it
from
just
the style,
all over the place, because there's not like an arc in the art style. There's no clear.
This is it suddenly just morphs for no reason, and then it'll morph again in the future. But sorry, going back to Mr. Qel-Droma, who is arguably our main protagonist.
Yeah, I would say so. Odan is kind of like and Nomi Sunrider are sort of like second place protagonists.
I think the other thing too, just
And
quick,
Kay Keldroma obviously plays a
Yeah,
really big,
just as
a
a quick-
really big role too, but he's a supporting character. He's like the Obi-Wan to Qui-Gon or something in Phantom Menace.
Yeah. So I was just going to say with Tales of the Jedi, there's a lot, because we do so many different time skips and different story arcs within the overall premise of Tales of the Jedi. You have kind of different shifting characters that fill the roles of protagonist and main villain. And like they tell a complete story. The story will kind of conclude, tie a little bow tie, and then it'll start another story. Right. So, and some of those stories are sharing characters. So yeah, that's why they're kind of their position in, like, to say one character is the main character of Tales of the Jedi is a little difficult, where you'll end up with people like, yeah, is it Nomi Sunrider? Is it Ula Keldroma? It depends what story you're actually looking at.
And Tales of the Jedi was really, it was almost kind of like the birth of the EU as we know it, with like everything being connected to everything else all the time.
Which will be coming up later. We'll definitely delve into
this
that.
was like the first time that they really
strove for
did
that.
that and like did a good job. They, as I brought up in a past episode, this is where Star Wars started getting turned into hypertext fiction, right? You've got all these different nodes of stories going on that you have to consume separately in different media forms in order to get the full story of the Jedi Order or whatnot. So anything else interesting about Ula Keldroma other than his jaw? He, he of course was a fallen Jedi. He turned to the dark side at a certain point, and there's the great Star Wars does redemption arcs really well, and he's got a nice redemption story. I won't give too many spoilers.
Yeah, we'll try and be a little spoiler light. There might be one here and there, but yeah, his main draw is he's the Anakin figure.
Yeah, although I think obviously I always love doing my versus, because I'm a 9-year-old boy who would win in a fight of like who's the most evil.
Right.
I think Anakin definitely
it's hard to
is
be
much eviler than Ula.
Yes.
I think Ula Keldroma, even though he was a Sith Lord, I don't think he committed war crimes. I think he only killed enemy combatants, or mostly enemy combatants.
On that note, you are kind of correct in that even his fall to the dark side was for a noble cause. I guess arguably Anakin's was as well. But with Ulick, I'm just trying
Anakin was still pretty selfish, though. He was doing it to save his girlfriend.
Sure,
right?
yes. And Ulick, so here's an interesting thing that I found, is that Ula Keldroma tries to conquer the dark side by joining the dark side.
I thought Exar Kun did that.
Did he?
Well, we've got
admittedly, it's been a while
for
since
us.
I read this comic.
We're plugged into the HoloNet right now, and
We can do a quick search.
we can bring up his dossier. All right, so like many an after-school special, Ula Keldroma's fall came when he started doing drugs. His friend, am I giving a proper reading of that?
To be fair, I think he got drugged.
Satal Keto got drugs. Satal Keto injected him with some sort of rage-inducing poison, and that sort of made him fall further. But he'd already had like this sort of relationship with Frieden Nad's Force Ghost, and as we know, Sith Force ghosts are much more likely to influence the world in a more direct way than Jedi Force ghosts, and so
More passive. Yeah.
and so maybe there's something in that relationship. And also because places where Sith are buried or they spend a lot of time often become dark side nexuses, and as Onderon did, because it held the tomb of Frieden Nad, who is he was a Dark Jedi exile, right? Not a Sith, or was he a Sith? I can't remember.
There's a lot of okay. One big complaint about also Tales of the Jedi, again, is kind of backing up a little bit, is there's a lot of new characters.
And a lot of them look kind of the same.
Similar, yeah.
Especially the Keldromas.
Yeah. So you have a bunch of new villains, which we'll get into later, but Frieden Nad, yes, he was a human. Human. So he would have been a Jedi exile, I believe.
Yeah.
Because the other ones would have been actual Sith species. like Nagasadao and who's the other one?
Ludo Crash.
Ludo Crash, yeah.
They're
Would
the
have
ones
both
who
been
have sort of
Sith.
Yeah. So, yeah, does he even have a cool lightsaber? Just a green lightsaber.
One thing on the lightsabers too.
They were designed a little bit differently in Tales of the Jedi. They didn't look so like as cyberpunk as like Luke's lightsaber and even Darth Vader's. It's got like asymmetry and stuff, but the lightsaber hilts in Tales of the Jedi are much more streamlined and kind of fancy, epic fantasy looking.
Yeah, that's the thing I would say is even a lot of the tech from Tales of the Jedi, the spaceships, the technology, all of it seems, I don't know how to describe it, it's meant to look old. It's very divorced from what we recognize as Star Wars.
Yeah, there's like the people in the Empress Theta system has like a very distinct style of ship, and their ships have sails, for example.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's like reminiscent of almost like Baroque style, with sails and big like weather vanes sticking out of everywhere.
I think in the Empress Theta system especially, they were sort of going for a Grecian kind of look because the Daragon twins or siblings, the hyperspace explorers who sort of open a whole big can of worms for the galaxy. And they sort of run around basically in skimpy little tunics.
Yeah, I never made
sandals and stuff.
I never made that connection, but in hindsight, you're definitely right.
And then when you look at Greek culture, it was obviously very nautical and lots of sailboats and small sailboats too. And what is it? A catamaran? Is that the thing that has like two sort of hulls on it?
Yeah,
pontoony things.
Yeah.
I'm not a sailor.
I don't know if that's also.
I'm a spacer. I only know hyperdrives.
We don't fly watercraft.
That primitive technology.
But on that note, I think stylistically it was just done because this was the first foray into the past.
Yeah.
So this predates Dawn of the Jedi. This predates Knights of the Old Republic as a story. So I think technologically they tried to make things look and feel old, right? The same kind of associations we have, like you said, like that Grecian feel. The Sith Empire has obviously a very Egyptian feel.
Yeah.
A lot of the buildings are.
I read that they were specifically told
not to
base any cultures on real cultures,
and they just did it anyways.
And that's all they did.
I think it's hard for people to.
It's essentially when you say don't base them on any cultures, then you're saying like break the laws of thermodynamics, create something out of nothing.
Nothing.
Right?
Yes, exactly. Everything is based off of something.
Doesn't really happen. So that was kind of a tall order for George to give them.
Yeah. And even like the buildings, they look almost like all the structures look like they're stone based. Whether or not that's true, sure. It's definitely the vibe I get from it.
Yeah, even I think we get some frames of Coruscant.
Yeah,
right?
and it looks like an ancient city.
It looks like stones, but like an ancient city that's sort of a utopian 50s sci-fi kind of vision.
So that's it's mixed obviously with I want to say totally blanking.
I can't help you. I have no
Flash
idea
Gordon.
What you're saying.
It's got like a Flash Gordon-esque
yes.
sci-fi mixed with ancient history and buildings and structures. And there's definitely a Ralph McQuarrie art style layered over all of that as well. I find a lot of like the face masks and
then I think
headwear.
The Sith too, the old Sith Empire, reminds me a lot of Conan the Barbarian, and that it's like they have that kind of weapons and just these ridiculous huge fantasy swords and crazy axes and stuff.
Yeah.
And everybody's wearing loincloths.
Yes, yeah.
And capes when it's cold, but it's like if you're cold,
but you're still not wearing a
and
shirt.
You're wearing a loincloth, maybe that's the first thing you look at. Why bother with this cape nonsense? No wonder the Sith were so angry. They're cold all the time wearing those loincloths. Okay. So Ula Keldroma, before he fell to the dark side, he was falling in love a little bit, having some dates, flying some beasts around Iziz on Onderon with Nomi Sunrider. And Nomi Sunrider, I think she's a great character. And not to beat a dead horse too much, but as far as, Disney goes, and if you want to have a strong, interesting...
Star Wars is full of strong, interesting female characters.
Protagonists. Nomi Sunrider is a pretty good one because she was a character that really stood out to me as being like super original in the Star Wars universe. Because she's a single mom. You don't really see many like action heroes single moms. Especially in the Star Wars universe. I can't think of a single one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Star Wars, but I think a big one is from Terminator.
That's
Sarah
right.
Connor.
Sarah Connor.
Did Terminator... I wonder if... No, they wouldn't have been inspired.
For
People
sure.
can have original ideas.
Yes. The other thing that's really interesting about her character is that she refused Jedi training even though she was Force sensitive, and her husband, Ander, became a Jedi Knight. But she was a super pacifist, and that's part of the reason why she didn't become a Jedi, because she didn't want to use a lightsaber ever. And so that's sort of part of the arc of her character, is her finally picking up Anders' lightsaber when her master Thawne is put in danger, and she's the only one who can help, and that's like sort of a big moment for her. But then it's weird because that's the moment when she's officially becoming a Jedi, but she's sort of giving up her values of peace and not killing people, right?
I think that's like a bigger philosophical question, like about pacifism in general. Like if you allow evil things to happen, and I don't want to, this could be its whole hour and a half discussion, but the big question of like, well, if you allow evil to happen, how complicit are you in that activity, right? So at least for Nomi's character, let's say, she's obviously made that decision that like she needs to become an interventionist in order to really fulfill those ideals of peace, right?
And then it's also, there's a interesting psychological wrinkle to her character in that she sort of beat herself up a lot for not being fast enough when her husband was put in danger, and like she just froze with fear and couldn't pick up the lightsaber, even though she was sort of saying that, it's because I'm a pacifist, but it's like really she was just scared and she couldn't move fast enough. And so what does that mean when she does finally pick up the lightsaber? Was she really just being cowardly or sticking to her principles the whole time? But then in any event, she sort of in her head redeems herself when she does finally pick up that lightsaber on the part of Thawne. And Thawne is the other part who would have been really interesting to see in a Star Wars movie, because he's like this big
quadruped.
He has opposable thumbs because he can use a
but he walks around on all fours.
But he generally walks around on all fours.
He's very bestial, and they even like Nomi doesn't believe that he's a Jedi Master.
Yeah, she just thinks he's some crazy animal because his student is actually riding on top of him. Yeah, and that would have been great to see in a movie as well. Seeing Master Thawne run around again.
Stepping back for kind of a big picture analysis, a lot of the aliens in Tales of the Jedi are very unique.
Cool. Yeah.
Very unique. You don't see them again. A lot of, you get your familiar Star Wars aliens that you see, like Twi'leks are everywhere, Yeah. Even the Sith species in this comic series and in Dawn of the Jedi, you see reappear. But there's a lot of one-off species.
There's Odan he's my spirit animal. He's ripped. That's one thing. He's on some kind of space creatine, I think. And so are all Drythos is. But Odaner's big thing is he just wants to read. He just wants people to leave him alone. And then when he finally does get in the thick of things and there's a fight that breaks out, he accidentally kills a guy. It's like
he's just too powerful.
Just put him back in his library. He's dangerous. Yeah. It's like story of my life, buddy. So he's cool. The Drythos are interesting. Even just their head construction is really what makes them different from...
You just want to describe it?
Yeah, they have these sort of long heads that almost come to like a bunny sort of overbite that they have. And they have this this really interesting jaw construction where it's almost like they don't have a lower jaw, but they've got these protruding teeth. And then because of their head shape, it sort of makes them look a little bit like they're stooped forward, like a scholar, right? The classic
hunched over a book
look.
Yeah.
So he's cool. The Drythos also lived to be 700. So he's a character who's with us from like the beginning of Tales of the Jedi, sort of to the very end where, well, I won't give any spoilers, but he lives out his lifespan, let's say. And another awesome thing about Oda to me anyway, is he got possession of the Dark Holocron. And so holocrons serve the same function in the Star Wars universe as grimoires or books of spells kind of do in horror literature, or especially in like H.P. Lovecraft style weird fiction, or even Hellraiser. There's these ancient artifacts that have like this hidden evil magic that
they have like an
unleash.
Intrinsic power.
They have an intrinsic power, but it's also because of the information that they hold.
Yeah.
And
it's a whole narrative of like dangerous knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then in Star Wars, that's always represented by the holocrons. And that's one of the very cool things about the expanded universe is how important holocrons are and how that's showing a different kind of information technology that doesn't even really exist in our world. We don't properly have an equivalent of a holocron, this thing that's like part spiritual, part technological.
Yeah.
And
it's very unique.
They can interact with users in a variety of ways.
It's not strictly like an AI. It's not, pre-recorded so you can interact. It's almost a living fluid kind of bastion or reservoir of knowledge.
Yeah. And so a nice Oda quote: "To be brave in battle proves nothing. Bravery itself proves nothing. A Jedi should be prepared to put aside fear, regret, and uncertainty, and either fight, run, surrender, or die." That seems like really strange tactical advice. I don't know. I'm not with you.
Jedi aren't known to be great tacticians. If the clone troopers can attest to that.
That's either fight, run, surrender, or die. It's like
those are your options.
That's a lot. So basically, either do one of all the possible things that you could possibly do in a fight. All right. And so Oda an interesting alien, he was trained by another super interesting alien, which is a Selegian, and they look like brains, essentially. They're just gigantic brains with sort of a spinal cord hanging off of them, and they have to travel around in like a special atmosphere from their planet, and they have telekinesis, and so they float around. Kind of reminds me of a Futurama bit. That's I think they stole that from Star Wars.
Yeah. And again, it lends to that like unique Jedi don't have to be 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, right? Like, they don't need to wield a lightsaber. They don't need those things. Don't make a Jedi, right?
Exactly.
It's the philosophy that these living entities, whatever they look like, embrace. Which I think is an important part of even the story with characters like Master the quadruped. Thawne.
Thawne, yeah.
Yeah, Thawne, and like this one as well, right?
Yeah.
I think they contrast that a lot with like what a Jedi looks like isn't necessarily.
Yeah, a Jedi's, it's all inclusive.
Right.
It's diverse. You don't have to be, there's no anthropocentrism here.
Again, it's about the philosophy, not about what you can do.
And then we've got Nagasadao. He's
moving on to the villains.
Yeah, he's introduced in this comic book run. He is sort of the progressive faction in the old Sith Empire, if you want to say that. He's the one who pushed for invading the Republic once they figured out how to get out of the Stygian caldera, which I'm not really sure why they were stuck in it. I understand why, based on what that region of space. It has like this nebula. We'll get into it on the episode. But there's sort of a reason that makes sense for why the Republic wouldn't know
That they exist.
But it just
Why
they
couldn't
didn't
leave?
really set it up what exactly kept the Sith from getting out of there.
Yeah.
But I could be
Like
missing something.
and you could read your own into it. Like it could be anything from like they're too busy infighting, or they don't have the technological progression.
Oh well, actually, they were kind of yeah. No, I think they were traumatized by the 100 Years Darkness, like that, because by that time in Sith culture, they had the Jedi exiles had interbred with the Sith species, and so humans were a huge part. I think even most Siths had human DNA. Essentially, there were no more Sith,
Pure blood Sith.
Sith purebloods. Although Sith pureblood actually means that you have dark Jedi exile blood in you. Which
Ironic.
does not make sense. One of the many reasons I keep flipping things in this, because even the meaning of the word Sith is just like goes back and forth. But so anyway, Nagasato, he wanted to invade the Republic. Ludo Kresh, who's also introduced, did not. Nagasato and Ludo Kresh have a really cool
Dynamic. Yeah.
but they have a really cool sword fight, and with like real swords, not lightsabers,
Yeah.
at Marka
Actual blade
Ragnos's
swords, yeah.
tool. And they're really interesting too, because they almost look like chipped stone or something. Like they're really asymmetrical blades with a bunch of jagged edges, like it's a crystal maybe that was cut
Forged,
and shaved
yeah.
and flaked. Well, not
Not
forged.
forged.
The opposite of forged. It's just like chipped out of a larger crystal lattice or something like that.
Yeah. We'll have to look into maybe what the tech is behind that, if there is anything. There's
Yeah.
always something. Star Wars always has something.
And then there's Exar Kun. I think he's my, or is it Exar Keen? I think that's how you're supposed to pronounce it.
I always
or
pronounce it
something.
Exar Kun.
Kun. I'm not sure, but also another lantern-jawed fellow. He's the person who first started making face tattoos cool. I know we all think it was
Forehead
Post
tattoos.
Malone, but in fact it was Exar Kun. He's got a nice forehead tattoo there, and Exar Kun is also the place where we first get that meta story, that hypertext fiction, because he was first introduced by Kevin J. Anderson in his Jedi Academy novels that were, I think, when Tales of the Jedi came out, the Jedi Academy novels were like mid-run, like the second had just came out or something. And so Kevin J. Anderson and Tom Veitch, who is the head writer for most of Tales of the Jedi, collaborated a lot and decided that Exar Kun would fit in really nicely to the time period that Tom Veitch was writing. And so
They decided to
do it. And I think to great effect, because I think he was a very cool villain, the guy who invented double-bladed lightsabers.
Yeah. So even before the mainstream audience was introduced to the double-bladed lightsaber in 1999, Episode 1, Darth Maul,
Yeah.
it actually already existed in universe through Exar Kun.
And as like an important thing, like
Yeah.
in Phantom Menace, it's almost just a throwaway detail.
Yeah.
It
It's
doesn't
like,
re-
that's sweet, but yeah.
And it's almost like you could see them coming up with that idea simply because there was Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan.
Yeah, so he has to fight too.
So he has to fight too. You give him that double-bladed lightsaber.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not that it was this really obscure reference to something that's like 5,000 years old. And so, yeah, as a 9-year-old, I definitely like that piece of fanfic.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was saying, is that they do, there's a lot of these subtle transpositions that they take from Tales of the Jedi. And it's not an accident. Like, they did their research. They knew what they were taking from the old stuff. Whether or not there was like an intent, like, oh, Darth Maul is a Sith. He's adopting this ancient Sith technology. More so than just like, this is a cool feature from the EU. Let's introduce it into the mainstream.
Yeah.
Right. So it definitely wasn't an accident. Like you said, they started like to collaborate even in the EU between Veitch and Anderson.
Anderson,
right?
yeah. And,
So-
and Tom Veitch, by the way, he also wrote Dark Empire, which
yeah.
was one of I think it was Dark Horse's first run.
Yeah. So in comic book history, Marvel initially had the rights where they did these like weekly Flash Gordon
They did
type
not do a good
adventure things that really are different for Star Wars.
There actually are some
There's some good
stories
gems.
in there.
There's some
Yeah.
gems in the rough for sure. But it's not how you would imagine. It's definitely a product of its time. And then Dark Horse picked up the licensing, I think because of Veitch. Veitch proposed the Dark Empire thing, and I think Lucas liked it enough to actually give the rights
I
to
think
Dark
it was
Horse.
mostly just because LucasArts didn't care.
Or that.
And that's
you
kind of
want to pick up this product? Okay, fine.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Is because Marvel did such a bad idea. I think like the sales were not doing that well. Marvel didn't really want to do it because they
didn't seem like they were invested.
They hadn't done anything interesting with it, and then Lucasfilm was just like, oh well,
Sure, take it.
It's not a good market for Star Wars comics.
Yeah,
so whatever.
And so after Dark Empire came out,
And they had no plans for the movie, for the prequel trilogy at that
coming
point
out,
either.
yeah. So it was just like
They were focused on, and Tom Veitch, I think, also worked on the Indiana Jones comic books. And so LucasArts was like developing the Indiana Jones brand at the time, I believe, because they had a bunch of video games and stuff that also came out during the 90s and those comic books and the Young Indiana Jones TV series.
Yeah.
And there was a series of young adult fiction books and stuff.
the Indiana Jones EU,
Yeah,
if you will.
literally, and
Yeah.
so that was LucasArts' big focus at the time.
Yeah. But anyways, it's essentially Dark Empire led to Tales of the Jedi, which essentially spawned the entire comic book Star Wars industry.
Yeah,
Which, especially for Dark Horse had the license all the way until 2015, until Disney got the rights back, and because Disney owned Marvel, then Marvel reacquired the rights and are now producing the comics. But at least a lot of my personal favorites are the Dark Horse history era EU comic books.
yeah. I think Tales of the Jedi is maybe my favorite Star Wars comic runs so far.
Really?
That I've read. There are a lot
It's
of.
not mine, and I will get to my complaints in a bit here, but
There's a ton of filler in, for example, the Knights of the Old Republic comic book. Like, there's a lot of storylines that are completely unnecessary in that, and it actually was very detrimental to the
main
overall story because
yeah.
you just sort of got confused when they finally got back to the main.
you kind of
story.
forgot about it altogether.
Yeah. But we're not reviewing that. Although Tales of the Jedi is hugely important for the video games, and I think I sort of knew this because they do mention Exar Kun and Frieden Nad and stuff in the first Knights of the Old Republic game, but really the whole political landscape that the Republic is in was shaped by the events of Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah.
That being the first Mandalorian Wars, right?
Yeah.
And
Even
Exar Kun, right? He's really the one who created the political
climate.
strife that was in the Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah, because they had just come out of the Sith Wars.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't know this, and I was a big KOTOR fan, and then I read Tales of the Jedi long after I played KOTOR. And like, yes, you see the references, like Onderon is a big planet in both the game and in the comic book series. There's a lot of overlap, and you kind of think like, oh, that's a cool like throwaway reference. But upon further reading, they are directly
and
tied.
Onderon alone has like such a huge mythology attached to it.
Yeah, and they're directly tied to the KOTOR series, and the KOTOR series is built on the back of Tales of the Jedi to such a degree.
And then another part of that hypertext story also with Tales of the Jedi is, I think the Star Wars RPG had been around before then, but Tales of the Jedi, it was released alongside an expansion pack for the tabletop role-playing game, and so a lot of the lore was like created specifically to be RPG fodder.
Yeah.
And then the KOTOR video game is actually literally, the mechanics are based off of a D&D engine, so it's very much paying homage to that Tales of the Jedi D&D tabletop RPG playing kind of stuff.
Yeah. Even the idea of things like so in KOTOR, the Mandalorian Neo Crusaders implies that they are resurgent Crusaders, right? And I always wondered, even when playing the games, I'm like, okay, why are they Neo Crusaders? Why aren't they just regular Crusaders? And you discover the actual Mandalorian
The ones
Crusaders,
with the bad Batman helmets.
yeah, originate in Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So like KOTOR takes place only 40.
The Crusaders armor, by the way, very cool. It's
Yes,
like,
we'll touch on the Mandalorian because I'm actually excited to talk about
it's
them.
all spikes and gold. And
Yeah. But KOTOR takes place only 40 years after the end of Tales of the Jedi.
Right.
So even like you have characters that have been alive, like characters like Jolie Bindo, who does make reference to Nomi Sunrider. I believe they would have been alive. They could have been alive.
Yeah.
Or, they're only one generation apart, right? So there's definitely, it wasn't that long ago that Tales of the Jedi takes place before KOTOR. And just an interesting little bit of trivia about Bastila Shan. She was actually supposed to be Nomi Sunrider's daughter, Vima Sunrider.
Right.
But because of some copyright disputes, they decided to change her character. So it's that closely related, where a character from Tales of the Jedi was supposed to be one of the main characters of KOTOR.
And this is a hot take. This is unconfirmed. But our current working theory is that the copyright infringement was some sort of, it looks like it could have been some sort of multi-level marketing company who had a really aggressive legal team and sued LucasArts, because you can find no reference to what
the actual
what
claim
the copyright violation was, which is a weird thing. Like if it's another intellectual property, you'd think they
would at least mention it.
And that property would want people to mention it as well. But a multi-level marketing scheme, it's like maybe somebody in LucasArts was like working for them.
It's an inside job.
Yeah, it's an inside job.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just interesting to see how closely related the two franchises are. And I also have a complaint about that, but we'll deal into the complaints at the end of this. But
continuing with the hair cast. Princess Leia, very distinctive hair. Padme Amidala, distinctive hair. Nomi Sunrider.
Is this going to be like your hat theory?
Yeah, this is like my hat theory. Nomi Sunrider, though, has the story of her hair is quite interesting, because it looks like, to me, there was about 3 or 4 different artists who all
contributed,
who all drew Nomi at different periods. And I think in each of those phases, she's got a very different hairstyle. And I think the problem is that each one, they tried to do something unique that the next artist couldn't really copy in a good way. So then they just sort of made their own thing up about it. And the result is just some interesting hair.
And it morphs.
That's another idea that Disney ripped off from the comics is, given, what's her name? Daisy Ridley, the... crazy triple ponytail. They're just trying to have
a distinct
hairstyles, like all good Star Wars female protagonists, I guess. Something that would take you 9 hours to do. I have a whole thing about science fiction and like ridiculous hairstyles.
You need to release it. We should have an episode just on the hairstyles.
Oh, don't even get me started on Star Trek's hairstyles. Okay. So those are, and then some other important characters. We get the brother and sister dynamics that come up
quite a lot.
3 different times.
Yeah.
There's the Daragons.
The twins that discover.
They're hyperspace explorers who accidentally discover the Sith Empire. And by the way, an interesting thing about them is that it looks like Arbor the Hutt may have a attraction to human females, which we thought before was exclusive to the Disilogic Kaijudik, that they were sort of the only Hutts, but I don't think Arbor the Hutt was a Disilogic. And also what's interesting about Arbor the Hutt compared to other Hutts is that he wears clothes. He wears like a vest and this weird sort of, it looks like a Shriner's hat. And then he also gets around by hover sled, but he uses it as though he was an anthropoid, like he lies down in it rather than how most other Hutts do it, where they're just
like reclined.
And then anatomically, it would be difficult to recline on your back as a Hutt if they're gastropods, and it is canon that they're gastropods, because what gastropod means is belly or stomach foot, right? Because slugs have this giant muscle
That acts as
on
their
the
foot,
bottom
yeah.
called a foot. And that's what it does. And so if you think about that, that's where all their musculature and mass sort of comes from. So if you then put them on their back, they would essentially just have this big musculature of the foot
weighing down
on this
Yeah.
squishy back part.
It's like if you comfortably hung upside down for extended periods of time as like your kind of default
yeah, it's like
pose.
doesn't make sense
Yeah.
anatomically, but the huts are weird. They get into all kinds of
You can't put
strange
rules
things.
on how they live life.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows?
But the brother-sister dynamic.
The
or
brothers
siblings dynamic. I should
Satal
say.
and Alima Keto, the Krath, the people who
Are they
start.
twins?
They might even be twins.
Yeah, I can't remember if they're twins or not. But
Yeah,
they're
they're-
siblings for sure.
but
Or no,
they're
they're
s-
cousins.
Are they?
I believe they're cousins. Yeah, they look very similar.
Oh no, you're right.
Yeah,
I think you are right.
But they still have a-
I got them mixed up with the Daragons.
Yeah.
but they still have a problematic relationship, I believe. But so they're just sort of evil, get into Sith magic, and then of course you got the Keldromas as well, who
Kay Keldroma, who we kind of glossed over, is the brother of Ula Keldroma.
yeah, and then that's almost sort of, I guess, a repetition of the Dark Empire storyline, really, with sort of Leia
And Luke.
redeeming Luke
Yeah.
when he falls, and Kay Keldroma redeems Ulick.
in a roundabout way, I
Yeah.
suppose you could say. Yeah.
And so, yeah, Kevin J. Anderson and Tom Veitch worked together on it. And then at a certain point, it's interesting because Tom Veitch just seems to have quit just because he felt like it, and he just felt like he'd done
I think
as
yeah,
good
it
a
was more
job
of
as he could do
creative thing of
with
like,
Star Wars. And
yeah.
he's like, okay. And then Kevin J. Anderson, it sounds like he was also really getting into writing comics, because I think this was the first time Anderson had ever written on any comic books, but he was basically given sort of the equivalent job as a showrunner on a TV show, for example. Like he was basically running the
operation.
the
yeah.
creative end of the comic book, and so I think he really got into. And I almost wonder, I was reading between the lines, I wonder if Kevin J. Anderson kind of maybe edged him out a little bit, but
Possible.
that's pure speculation. Yeah, Gossett designed the double-bladed lightsaber. He was I'm just going to say he was the best artist on Tales of the Jedi because he invented that. So that's pretty cool.
It's claim to fame.
That's good. I remember this. I remember finding Nomi's robe in KOTOR and thinking it was a strange name, because I'm like, who's Nomi? Like,
Yeah.
that's nobody who's in this game. And
Yeah.
it's like super deep.
There's two items, I believe: Nomi's robe and Nomi's
armband. And then there's also in the KOTOR game Thawne's robes, which doesn't make sense because he wouldn't have Jedi robes, but
Yeah.
that's clearly what they are.
Maybe
But-
it was a ceremonial thing.
Yeah, they're clearly made for like a human, and he's this gigantic, like carapace dog creature.
I think
But
of him like a rhino.
I was looking at a picture of those robes today, and I was like, you know what? Those look pretty comfortable. I think I could go.
Maybe they're super roomy.
Yeah, I could go for some Thawne robes. Here, I'll read you something about Nomi Sunrider's hair, the saga of
I found that even when I was reading it,
Sunrider's
I was
hair.
very confused about what was going on with her hair. But
the one part of her hair, the hairstyle that sticks out most to me is at one point she has what looks like she shaved a widow's peak into her
it,
head,
yeah.
but then left like tufts around sort of her forehead bang area, which
Yeah.
is like, I've never seen that. Very long hair.
yeah,
And then Anders Sunrider, of course, was a white guy with dreads, and maybe that's why he died. I don't know. But Nomi Sunrider's hair drastically changes throughout the duration of the Tales of the Jedi comics. In her initial introduction in the saga of Nomi Sunrider, she has long flowing hair. In the following story arc, which takes place almost immediately after, she has, as I said, the upper portion of her forehead appearing to be shaved midway to the scalp.
Yeah.
But
It's like an extreme receding hairline.
It looks like a widow's peak, or almost like a devil lock if you've seen the Misfits. Like they kind of intentionally style their hair that way. But then there's one that I didn't even catch where it says the upper portion of her forehead appearing to be shaved midway on the scalp with tiny braids intersecting the baldness. I missed the tiny braids part. But anyway, her hairstyle changed again in the following story arcs repeatedly, constantly disrupting the visual continuity of her character's appearance. I don't remember now, but I wonder if there was even, and I've noticed this actually a lot and even in more recent Star Wars comics, that lightsaber color continuity is really bad for some reason.
Yeah.
They'll have like a green or even a red lightsaber, and then it's suddenly blue later on in the same
or the red is
issue.
sometimes seen as a pinkish color.
I understand that, but sometimes I've definitely seen it's like Luke has a blue lightsaber. 2 pages later, it's clearly a green lightsaber.
Get your act together. You guys can have characters that intersect over thousands of years, and you can't keep a color consistent.
You can't keep the color. Yeah, that's what seems strange to me. It's like,
I think that's a problem with comic books in general. Is just like because your inker and your drawer or your artist
they're doing things
different
separately for sure. Yeah,
and especially with something like Tales of the Jedi that has so many different intersecting artists, I could see that's exactly where that came from. Just as unique to the comic industry specifically. Yeah.
So did we miss anything? Did we
a big part that I would like
capture
to
I shouted out what's his name? Christian Gossett, because he invented the double-bladed lightsaber. Big ups to him.
He was a big he kind of set the tone for the design of Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Which I like, but I have some complaints. We'll get into the complaints at the very end here. But before we dive into that.
Also, I'll name check Lucy Wilson. She sounds like she could have been a pain to work with, but that's just because it sounds like that was her job. She was essentially the continuity person for LucasArts, who looked at everything and said, this is okay, this is not, this is with George's vision, this is not. Another really weird thing I came across was that in the writing, they would give George questionnaires.
Yeah.
Where they would outline a bunch of different possible plot things, and then like just a questionnaire of George Lucas like circling A or B.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the creative input George had on Tales of the Jedi, was answering questionnaires, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah. But we don't know
That'd
the
be
details.
a weird way to write something.
Yeah.
But
we don't know
that as it may. And Lucy Wilson, she worked on a whole bunch of the big Star Wars properties. I think I talked about her in the Shadows of the Empire episode. Also, I think she invented Prince Shizor's name, and she was part of like the initial writers meeting there. And so she then has had a greater effect on the Star Wars universe just because she's been in there.
Yeah.
She was in
Behind
there from
the
like the
scenes.
very beginning of the EU, essentially.
Yeah. Which is good. I can appreciate someone who is at like center.
I would love to have a blue alcoholic beverage with her and talk Star Wars about her.
Yeah.
I bet she could go like for 19,000 hours about, and all the stuff
or she's totally done with it because like that's all she's
maybe
lived
she would
and
just be
breathed for
so
the last.
sick of it because she did seem to have that job for about 10 years.
Yeah. Now, if you do happen to listen to this podcast,
Lucy, come on the show.
yeah, reach out to us. We'd be happy to have.
All
an
right. So, what are
interview.
your problems with the art?
Okay, the art specifically, or just with the whole? Let's say the design. The design of it.
I think the design design elements were great in it. Actually, the Mesopotamian, Egyptian influences.
Yeah, no, I like all
stuff.
that. The ships are super unique.
The ships are awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So my problem is funny enough, in the overall continuity. So Tales of the Jedi has such a unique art style, and I get that it's meant to look and feel old, but because of its later placement being ahead of Dawn of the Jedi and its close proximity to Knights of the Old Republic, I think it's super inconsistent. So Dawn of the Jedi, the technology feels like Star Wars. It looks like Star Wars. It's still kind of sleek. They do add their ancient flares, I believe, if you go back and listen to our Dawn of the Jedi review. There elements,
aren't many ships, though.
There aren't, but the technology feels like Star Wars-esque. It's hard for me to describe. It's like a sleeker, cleaner look. KOTOR definitely is reminiscent of Star Wars, and that could be a complaint for KOTOR, is that it's too much like...
I would actually say, is that KOTOR doesn't look visually close enough to Tales of the Jedi, I don't think.
Right. So that fault can fall on either side. You could either argue that KOTOR doesn't look older than what's supposed to be...
And it's not even necessarily...
Well, here's the thing.
It's older in Star Wars, but it's just different, right? It's supposed to represent a specific era.
There's like thousands of year gap between KOTOR and, let's say, the movie era, and they're indistinguishable.
Yeah, if you go on the deck of the Ebon Hawk, it looks exactly the same as
the Millennium Falcon. And that's exactly my point. So there's no technological evolution in that period of time, but between the 40 years that take place between Tales of the Jedi and KOTOR, there's a massive shift. Now, again, for whatever reason, whatever fault you want to throw that on, you can throw that on KOTOR for not looking like Tales of the Jedi enough, or you could throw that on Tales of the Jedi to being too radically different for its placement in Star Wars history, which is almost like a backwards complaint, because you can't, at the time, KOTOR didn't exist at the time. Dawn of the Jedi didn't exist at the time.
And Veitch was also on record as saying he was really sort of going for a deeper exploration into the mythical roots of Star Wars. Like he was trying to pull explicitly from Greek myths and even make it look.
Even the Flash Gordon thing, because that was a big inspiration for George Lucas, right? So I get all that. I'm 100% behind all that. And like I said, the Ralph McQuarrie art style is definitely reminiscent, or appears in Tales of the Jedi.
I don't think it's very Flash Gordon looking, though, to be honest. I think it's just the coloring.
That could be part of it.
Reminiscent of Flash Gordon, but I think the actual design elements aren't very Flash Gordon-y. The Flash Gordon stuff is so like a little bit 20th century, but then plus really bad theater props, right? That's the
vibe I get from Tales of the Jedi. And
really,
like art is interpretive, right?
I get it. It's bad props, but it's all bad props from a specific Shakespeare play.
Sure.
Right? Like it's consistent across the board. Flash Gordon is more seat of the pants, much like a lot of the Star Wars design elements are just like that. Like Bosk's costume, for example, was just repurposed it was supposed to be like a World War II pilot's jumpsuit is what Bosk was wearing. From another movie that was about World War II.
Okay.
And then that became the basis for a whole bunch of other pilots in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not necessarily placing blame on Tales of the Jedi. It's a pretty strong inconsistency.
They were really cracking the whip on the artists who were working on Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah.
From what I read, like they were having to bring in hired guns halfway through, and people were like, artists were like quitting and going on sabbaticals in the middle of production and stuff because they're so stressed
just driven so hard. Yeah.
Just cranking this stuff out.
Again, like it's just a general
and because of that, the inconsistency is because they had a rotating
art team
cast of artists, and that happens sometimes, and that sucks because it would have been better if it would have been the same artists all the way through.
Yes,
wouldn't have been so jarring sometimes. That being said, though, I think the old Sith story arc is really cool to see how that enmity between the Republic and the Sith starts. The idea, that huge reveal, that's such like a Star Wars mind smash when you realize that Sith was a species, not just
a philosophy,
a bunch of crazy religious zealots.
And even further to that, the Mandalorians.
And I can't believe
we didn't even touch on
We barely even talked about how awesome the Mandalorians are.
Yeah.
We're just gonna do the Mandalore podcast at some point.
Just do Mandalorian exclusive.
Just nothing but Mandalore.
But even like, okay, so the Tong species were first appearing in Tales of the Jedi.
And that's also like a huge thing.
Yeah, exactly. Their armor style is very unique compared to any kind of Mandalorians you see in the
But
future.
also clearly inspired by Boba Fett's
yes,
armor.
with the T-visor, right?
But very different at the same time.
It looks more organic is the word I want to use.
To me, it looks organic mixed with Roman gladiator.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah.
But and now that you're mentioning it, that's one of the really great design elements of Tales of the Jedi. I think that makes it stand out is I think the Mandalorian Crusaders are very unique visually in sci-fi even, let alone in Star Wars. You don't really see anything that quite looks like them.
Yeah.
And then the Basilisk war droids too. Those are such an awesome idea.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to find out what writer, because the chronology. I'm not even going to get into it. We'll save it for the Mandalore podcast. Got anything else?
Just another complaint is
Oh, what a surprise.
you can't have a review without having an honest review has critiques.
That's
right?
true.
I think a lot of the big conflicts that it covers, you cover a bunch of major conflicts in Star Wars history, the hyperspace wars, the Sith wars, and a couple of other ones.
The Beast Wars.
The Beast Wars. That one's not necessarily
Freed
intergalactic.
and Ned uprising.
Yeah. So if you look at any Star Wars timeline, you'll see those events placed on them because they're pretty significant. To me, the way they're portrayed, and that could be a limitation of the comic book, they seem very quick and they're almost like revolve around single battles for supposedly big galactic events.
Yeah, Tom Veitch this was his brainchild for a long time before it actually got around to being made. He'd sort of mapped out the whole Old Republic era just on his own before he even wrote Dark Empire. And Tales of the Jedi was originally supposed to be longer. I think maybe the movie made Dark Horse want to shift gears. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm just speculating now. But
right.
It was supposed to be longer, and Tom Veitch, it sounds like he certainly had enough material that
you could have stretched.
This could have been like X-Men or something. Like
right.
It could have
just an ongoing
gone on forever and ever.
Yeah.
And so I think if that had been the case, that stuff would feel a little bit different because there'd be so much other stuff in Tales of the Jedi, and it probably would have built momentum and got bigger and bigger feeling stories.
Yeah.
But just because it's just in this relatively compressed format, they didn't really let them breathe enough.
You're right.
I feel like, and they seemed a little bit.
Did you get that same
scale.
vibe?
I got that same vibe, and I think that's why is because they were just trying to.
Yeah, I think it's a limitation.
A bunch of plot points.
Yeah.
At that point, and they just never got the chance to let
but
it
that
out.
also leaves room because of its format where you can imagine, okay, so you just see one or two panels that portray a big battle, but it doesn't necessarily encompass all of what happened in that battle too, right? So you could have all this other stuff that you can, in your imagination, add in yourself. So I do like that it's still a little open-ended. Some of them are really compressed time-wise, which you can't really get around, right? Like a major battle taking place in an evening and then being done, right? Like, and arguably that could be a complaint about Star Wars in general, but definitely it stands out in Tales of the Jedi, which is one of my major complaints about it. But other than that, what do you think is your kind of final takeaway or final feelings about Tales of the Jedi?
I highly recommend it, especially if you don't know where to start with Star Wars Legends, even the Star Wars Legends universe as a whole. It's also a good place to start, because I think it holds up a lot better than a lot of other Star Wars comics. I think a lot of Star Wars comics, especially that came out later too, they were really exploring every nook and cranny of the universe, but then in doing that, the stories they told just sort of got dopier and dopier and like lower and lower stakes. But Tales of the Jedi is it does hit on those melodramatic notes, kind of, especially with once Exar Kun comes. I think that's the best arc is him, or is it crap? Is it Exar Kun or Ula Keldroma who commands the Mandalorians?
It's Exar Kun.
Yeah, it's Kun. Yeah. So he has a great storyline with the Mandalorians and that stuff.
I think
because the Mandalorian's origin story is in that also makes it, I think, a good place to start with Legends comics or the expanded universe generally.
So I have the opposite take. I think even in that, where like you have trouble sometimes remembering. Now, granted, it was probably a while since you read Tales of the Jedi. I know for me, it's been quite a while, but it could just, again, being a whole new era, a whole new cast of characters. And it could be the art style. I heard some complaints about that, or read some complaints about that as well. It's sometimes hard to track all the new characters because you have all these like intertwining storylines and a whole new cast of people.
I think the biggest problem is just that inconsistent art style.
So you kind of forget what some characters look like when they're in a new setting. Yeah. I definitely wouldn't advise it as introductory material for a new fan. I think it's rewarding for a long-term fan who's been invested. I think there's easier reads to start into it. I think it's very dense, and again, because of things like shifting ourselves and stuff, you have to already be invested in Star Wars. I think it could lose new people very quickly. I think it's rewarding for someone who's been invested in Star Wars for a long time to go back and see the origins of there's a lot of cool things in there that you see the origins of, like the ruins on Yavin 4, right?
I think you're selling the story short.
Maybe. It's fair. It's a matter of opinion. This is mine. But yeah, again, it's rewarding for people to go back and look at all these cool features that were added in after.
What you're describing is sort of my experience reading the old Marvel comic run, is that, and this is actually an interesting thing, is Tom Veitch was like us about the Star Wars comics that had come before. Like, he knew everything about them, and he actually tried to incorporate storylines,
everything he could,
that Marvel had published and stuff. But what you just described, it's like, yeah, if you're a huge fan, it's fun to go back and look at this weird stuff they were doing. But I'm telling you, they're good stories that hold up.
It's not a critique of the story itself. I think it's more of the format and how it's delivered.
Better stories, I think, than Dark Empire.
That's a matter of opinion. But yeah, overall, not my favorite Star Wars material. Definitely some cool elements. I enjoyed it because I am a huge Star Wars fan. I think other big Star Wars fans should check it out.
So this is just for the elite, is what you're saying?
Yeah. It's after you've been versed in
us elite hacksaws.
A little bit of Star Wars mythology first. I think there are easier entries into the EU. And that's my take.
Such as?
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. The movies, for starters. Let's start there.
What's that? I hear twin ion engines. Get to the blaster quad, Christian. All right. I think I'm supposed to get you.
Thanks for flying with us. We are interested to hear from you. You can reach us at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts, comments, or corrections. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating, review, and subscribe. You can also help us out through our Patreon at the Star Lords Podcast. Find us on Instagram, the Star Lords Podcast, on Facebook at the Star Lords Podcast, on Twitter at the Star Lords Podcast, and on YouTube, Star Lords Podcast. We'll catch you next time.